Boldwood presents A Cornish Winter's Kiss, written by Joe Bartlett and read by Emma Powell. Chapter 1. Ever since she was a child, Emily had been certain that one day a magical moment would change everything. She'd meet the person capable of altering the entire path of her life, and when their eyes met, she'd know that this was it. Okay, so she was still waiting, and her certainty might have wavered a long time ago if she hadn't watched almost every rom-com ever made and devoured romance novels like her life depended on it. They were her escape whenever things got tough, and they'd saved her during the most difficult time of her life. Emily had been 15 when her mother, Patsy, had been involved in a car accident that had threatened to tear her whole family apart. Patsy had been in a coma for 5 days, and the road to recovery was grueling, painful, and terrifying. Emily's father had been forced to keep working full-time to pay the bills, and her older sister had just left home to start university. So it was Emily who sat by Patsy's bedside for days on end, not knowing if or when the mother she adored would ever fully come back to her. The doctors had warned them that the head injury she'd sustained might change her forever, but Emily couldn't bear for that to happen, and she'd promised herself she'd do whatever it took to get the mum she knew back. Emily had been there to help with physio and all the practical support her mother needed. She didn't mind that her entire life consisted of going to school and coming straight home to care for her mum, or that she never got to see her friends. Prior to the accident, Patsy's two main passions had been reading and listening to music. Before Emily left for school, she'd put the radio on for her mum, but as soon as she got home, she'd turn it off and sit down to read to her instead. Patsy had always been obsessed with the Bronte sisters, and Emily had reread the classic novels to her first. But then they'd moved on to paperbacks that she'd picked up from a charity shop in the next road to her school. She'd always picked cheerful stories with colourful covers that promised both her and her mother an escape from the harsh realities of what they were going through. Family holidays were on hold indefinitely, and for the best part of a year, Emily was almost as housebound as her mother. But it was those romance novels that had transported them both to another world. Emily could lose herself in the stories, living a completely different life through the characters' eyes. She'd travelled the world without ever leaving home and had worked her way through countless careers, when in reality she didn't even have time for a paper round. Best of all, the stories guaranteed the kind of happy ending she'd so desperately needed to believe in back then. Even after her mother eventually made an almost complete recovery, and Emily had managed to put the whole experience behind her, that love affair with a happy ever after had never waned. She didn't care if some people thought she should be reading Tolstoy or Virginia Woolf for it to be worthwhile. Reading was all about joy for Emily, and there was nothing more joyful than a good romance. Even if her best friend in the world still didn't understand why she loved those novels so much. "This is why you're still single." Jasmine jabbed a finger at the book Emily had just put down on the kitchen worktop. If she could have found a way of reading and chopping vegetables for the stir-fry at the same time, she'd have done it. Her inability to put down a book when she was really into it had got her into trouble in the past. She'd stopped borrowing books from the library after dropping one into the bath, and she'd even walked into a lamppost trying to read and walk at the same time. "Reading is why I'm still single." Emily ran a hand through her honey blonde hair and gave her friend a quizzical look. "If I have to choose between books and a boyfriend, I'll take the books." Exactly, but it's not even that." Jasmine's voice was muffled as she reached inside the fridge for some milk. "It's giving you unrealistic expectations. Real life isn't like a romance novel." "More's the pity." Emily laughed at the look of exasperation on her friend's face as she turned back towards her, milk in hand. "There's nothing wrong with not wanting to settle. I'm not talking about settling. I'm talking about expecting some kind of love at first sight encounter where fireworks start exploding in the sky the moment you lock eyes." Jasmine wrinkled her nose. She was a data analyst, and if something couldn't be explained logically, she wasn't interested. There was nothing she liked better than an algorithm, and the fact that one had matched Jasmine and her now fiancé Sam via a dating app made her an even bigger fan. It doesn't have to be fireworks. I just don't want to swipe right on an app, that's all. We could just be in a shop reaching for the same thing at the same time and... Serendipity. Jasmine shook her head. Seen it. They reach for the same pair of cashmere gloves and then pow, fireworks and a connection they can't deny. Like I keep saying, Em, life isn't a romance novel or even a rom-com. Okay then, maybe I'll be somewhere doing something really ordinary, like queuing for the loo, and he'll step aside and let me go ahead. What better way could there be to show who he is? Yeah, but Matthew Perry already did that to Salma Hayek. Jasmine's voice was monotone. Your Mr. Right is going to have to be more original than that. For someone who thinks romance novels and rom-coms are ridiculous, you certainly seem to know a lot about them. Years of living with you will do that to someone, Em. Jasmine's face softened. I love you, but it's your film choices that have got me addicted to the serial killer documentaries that freak Sam out so much. It's just an antidote to all that saccharine sweetness, but I think he's starting to worry about what he's getting himself into. He just has no idea how lucky he is. Emily couldn't resist giving her friend a hug, and she smiled to herself when Jasmine squeezed her back. It had taken a while for her friend to be able to be that demonstrative. They'd met at university and clicked immediately because of a shared sense of humour, although they'd already had very different reputations by then. Jasmine was the ice queen, according to those not lucky enough to know what good fun she was just below the surface. And Emily was the daydreamer. When her head wasn't in a book, it was in the clouds. They'd shared a student house from year 2 onwards, and then a flat when they'd both moved to London after graduation for work. 6 years on, they were still as different as ever, but they knew and understood one another's quirks. He should know how fortunate he is, because I remind him every day how lucky he is that I swiped right instead of left. It was a close-run thing. You tried to pretend it was all algorithms and technology, but we only set up your profile the night you matched with Sam because the open-air concert we were going to was rained off. The same concert where he was supposed to be meeting up with someone else from the app. Then the two of you matched in the meantime, and that was it. He never rearranged a date to see her because he'd found you. See, Jess? Even with the apps, serendipity plays a part. Only inside the mind of a hopeless romantic like you. Jasmine shook her head again, but she was still smiling. At least I'll get to watch as many murder documentaries as I like while you're away. You know you'll miss me, really. Emily nudged her in the side. And just in case it gets too much, I've loaded up the planner with a rom-com for every mood, from 50 first dates to the proposal. I'm not going to watch any of them. Jasmine gave her a pointed look. We both know you are. Emily stuck out her tongue, and Jasmine mirrored the action. Just get yourself on that train back to Port Agnes and leave me to my Netflix serial killers. Jasmine's face was suddenly serious. Although I do need you to promise me that you won't fall for a stranger who's waiting to have a documentary like that made about him. I promise. Emily gave her another hug. She really needed to get going if she was going to make it to Waterloo in time for her train home. She might not have found the love of her life yet, but Port Agnes came pretty damn close. Emily defied anyone not to find Waterloo Station romantic. It had its fair share of stressed commuters, admittedly, as well as crying children and their frazzled parents who were desperate to be almost anywhere else. But that could never tell the full story. Waterloo also had trains bound for the southwest coast, the most beautiful part of the country in Emily's opinion. She could have gone from Paddington Station and got the train direct to Cornwall, but there were 2 reasons she always went from Waterloo. The first was that changing at Exeter gave her a chance to meet up with her sister, Charlotte, and the second was the huge station clock. It was something that couldn't be missed, and it had become the perfect meeting point as a result. Sometimes Emily would get to the station early, just so that she could sit on a bench with a view of the clock to observe some of those meet-me-under-the-clock moments. She'd seen couples meet for the first time on blind dates, greeting each other with, "It's nice to meet you in person at last," and sometimes even going straight in for a kiss. She'd watched reunions she wasn't ashamed had brought tears to her eyes, and had even witnessed a couple of proposals. The clock had been there for over 100 years, and who knew how many couples had experienced their own life-changing moment beneath it. It was no coincidence that its hands were shaped like Cupid's arrows. There was no time to hang around today, though. She needed to be in Exeter by 1 o'clock to meet Charlotte, before heading on to Port Agnes to spend a week with her family. A whole week where she wouldn't have to wonder what the hell she'd done agreeing to take a job at the same firm where Jasmine worked. Spending all day doing things with data that she still didn't fully understand and which had never been part of the plan for her life. It paid far better than her previous job had, although she'd never have taken it for that reason alone. Emily had loved working in the city library where she got her first job after university, surrounded by books and kindred spirits who loved them as much as she did. The library had hosted a wide range of regular events too, from book clubs to parenting groups, aimed at encouraging people to read to their children and build a foundation for a lifelong love of books. It had made Emily feel like part of a real community, even in the midst of a city where she sometimes felt lost. When the local authority had announced it needed to make cutbacks in order to fill a £10 million hole in its budget, Emily had feared that the library might close, and sadly she'd been right. It had happened to so many libraries across the city, and she'd known that finding another job like that would be hard, but it had proved to be impossible. When Jasmine had urged her to apply for a post at her firm, just as a stopgap, Emily had decided to go for it, not intending to stay more than 6 months. Now here she was, 18 months into a job that was slowly sucking the life from her soul, one data entry at a time. She thought about moving back to Port Agnes, but she'd been so certain that she'd find her purpose in London, and it would have felt like admitting defeat to move back home, no matter how much she sometimes wanted to. "Do you need a hand?" The woman standing in front of Emily on the station platform looked seriously harassed. She had a baby and a toddler in a 2-seater pushchair with a large suitcase wedged underneath, half of it overhanging at the back and bashing her legs every time she tried to walk. "Thank you so much." The woman seemed to sag with relief. "My husband was supposed to be here, but he's got the flu, and I promised to go back home with the kids for my dad's 70th birthday. I thought it would be okay, but I've got no idea how I'm going to get these two and our luggage on the train by myself." "I can put your case and mine in the luggage rack and then come back and help you with one of the children, if you like." Emily smiled, but when she sensed a tiny bit of hesitation from the woman in front of her, she said the first thing that came into her head. "It's okay, you can trust me. I've got a DBS check and I used to run a parent and toddler group at one of the libraries." Emily flushed bright red. Why the hell was she talking about DBS checks? It made her sound as if she was a dodgy character trying to cover something up. The woman held her gaze for a moment and then started to laugh, lifting the last of the tension from her face. "Well, how can I say no to that? Thank you so much. My name's Bella, the baby is Max, and this little madam," she gestured towards the toddler, who at that moment was attempting to chew her way through the straps of the buggy, "is Maple. She's 3 but acts like she's 13 most of the time. I've never been bossed about so much in my life as I have since she learned to talk." "Great to meet you all. I'm Emily. Shall I get the luggage loaded on the train? We've still got 15 minutes until it's due to leave, so there's plenty of time to get settled." In the end, it took less than 10 minutes for them all to get on board and settled. Bella's little family was seated at a table at one side of the carriage, and Emily took a seat on the opposite side, not wanting to sit with them and seem like the weirdo she'd painted herself to be, with her earnest assurance about DBS checks. "Thanks so much again, Emily. I don't know what I'd have done without you." Bella let go of a long breath, the baby held against her chest as Maple sat in the seat next to her, busily colouring. "If I wasn't already married, I might have had to propose." Bella had a contagious laugh, and Emily couldn't help joining in. If this had been the plot of one of the books she loved so much, Emily would have offered to help Bella when she got off the train, and her handsome, single brother would have been waiting to pick her and the children up. He and Bella would invite Emily to join them at their father's birthday celebration, and it would be the start of her very own happily ever after. But this chance meeting with Bella and her family wasn't going to be the moment that changed her life. It was just one of those moments that helped solidify what she already knew, that brightening someone else's day invariably brightened hers too. When she eventually worked out what she wanted to do with her life, that was an aspect it needed to contain. She just had no idea how to make it happen yet. Emily had always quite enjoyed train journeys, at least when she wasn't wedged onto a packed carriage with no available seats, desperately trying to avoid nestling her face into someone else's armpit. That was what came of being 5 feet 1.5. When you could still shop in the children's department, that half an inch definitely counted. Thankfully, on this occasion, the train was relatively quiet, and it wasn't until they reached Salisbury that someone sat in one of the spare seats close to Emily. The woman who sat across the table from her was beautiful, in a way that could only be achieved by winning the genetic lottery. She was probably in her late 50s or early 60s, although it was hard to tell, with thick silver-grey hair cut into an immaculate bob and blue eyes that sparkled when she greeted Emily. "Good morning. Is anyone sitting here, or is it okay if I take the seat?" "Please do." Emily returned her smile and held up the book she'd been reading. "This book is the only company I've got today." Emily regretted the words the moment they were out of her mouth. The woman seemed very nice, and Emily had a feeling she'd be an interesting person if they sparked up a conversation, but you could never tell. She'd given this stranger an open invitation to talk to her, and it would be almost impossible to cut her off, even if she turned out to be an oversharer with no sense of personal space who wanted to spend the entire journey to Exeter discussing the problem she was having finding the right wormer for her cat. It might seem unlikely, but it was a conversation Emily had been caught in with a man called Graham on the way back from her last visit home, which had lasted all the way from Exeter to Basingstoke. "Good book, is it?" The woman raised her eyebrows as she took her seat, and Emily braced herself for a lecture about wasting her time reading stuff like that. She'd had that from strangers before too, and she deliberately kept her expression neutral, despite the fact that she was loving the book and could have waxed lyrical about it for the entire journey if she was given the chance. "It's great, but I love everything by Sophia Wainwright." "Really? Me too. She's brilliant, isn't she?" Emily leant forward in her seat, instantly forgetting her fears about getting embroiled in a boring conversation, delighted to have found a fellow fan. "I buy every book she writes as soon as it comes out, and my friend, who works in a bookshop, says she's writing a series set in Cornwall next. I'm so excited that my favourite author is going to be writing a series about my favourite place. I can't wait." "I should imagine Cornwall inspires lots of writers, so it's probably no surprise that—" "Mummy, I want a story now, please, 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 please." Maple's plea cut the woman's response off, and Emily turned to see the little girl tugging at her mother's sleeve, while Bella tried to give the baby a bottle. "2 more minutes and I'll read it to you, sweetheart. Okay, Max just needs to finish his bottle." "But I want it now." Maple was clearly desperate for a story, and Emily understood that feeling only too well. She was considering offering to help out, but she didn't want to interfere and make it seem in any way as if she thought Bella couldn't handle the situation, because she was doing an admirable job of managing 2 children on her own. Then there was a development she couldn't ignore. "Oh no, not now, Max, please." Bella's words swiftly followed a sound emanating from Max that could only mean one thing. He'd filled his nappy in no small way. "Do you want me to sit with Maple and read her story to her while you go and change the baby's nappy?" This time, when Emily made the offer, Bella didn't hesitate. The help she'd given them to get on the train was clearly much stronger evidence of her trustworthiness than the mention of a DBS check. "Oh my God, yes, please. Although, are you sure you don't want to do a swap?" Bella grinned, holding Max out towards her for a moment, before wrinkling her nose. A smell like overcooked cabbage wafted up as she did. "This is going to be fun." "Thanks for the offer, but I think I'll stick to the reading." Emily stood up, returning her smile, and slid into a seat opposite Maple as Bella got up. "Right, darling, Emily is very kindly going to read you a story while Mummy goes and changes Max's bottom." "Max has done a poo-poo, Max has done a poo-poo." Maple sang the words, and then turned towards Emily to give her an appraising stare. Mummy does funny voices when she reads to me. Can you do funny voices?" "How about this one?" Emily said the words in her best robot voice, and Maple burst into peals of laughter even more infectious than her mother's laugh. "Yes, yes! What else can you do?" Emily slipped easily into a much heavier version of the Cornish accent than she usually possessed. "Where I grew up, some people have an accent like this. What do you think?" Maple giggled again, and Emily caught the eye of the lady who shared her passion for Sophia Wainwright books, and she was smiling too. "Shall we read this book then? I'll see how many voices I can do, and you can try some too." "I know how to sound like Mummy when she's cross." "Do you now?" Emily couldn't help smiling again. "Pick up some of your toys, young lady." The little girl affected a serious tone and wagged her finger at Emily. "Very good. If there's a part for a cross Mummy in this story, you'll definitely have to do the voice. Although it really does help Mummy if you can put your toys away sometimes, and it's lovely to be helpful, isn't it?" Maple gave her a sage nod. "Yes, but not Max. He only cries and does poo-poos." It was hard for Emily to read with a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, but very soon both she and Maple were completely lost in the story. Every so often, Emily would stop and allow the little girl to repeat a line, so that it felt as if she was reading it too. It was a technique Emily had perfected in the read-along sessions at the library, and it was a big hit with most children. Maple was definitely among that number, and when her mother returned with Max, she begged Emily to read the story again on the basis that her little brother hadn't heard it yet, and then it wouldn't be fair if he didn't. "Thank you so much. She loved that." The gratitude would have been written all over Bella's face, even if her words hadn't spelled it out. "So did I. Maple's such a character." "Tell me about it." Bella rolled her eyes. "Although I wouldn't dampen that spirit of hers for the world. She's absolutely perfect. They both are." It was moments like this when Emily wondered if she should consider a career as an English teacher, but the pondering never lasted long before she decided against it. She wanted to connect to people through the power of books, but not as a teacher. When she fell in love with a story, it was because it brought her joy, and having to stick to a curriculum would have been too restrictive. "I'll leave you to it then, but you know where I am if you need another nappy change. We're getting off in 3 stops, thankfully, so we shouldn't have to bother you again. But I really would have been lost without you. You're an angel." "It was my pleasure." Emily's cheek flushed with heat. She always found compliments hard to accept, and for that reason alone, it was a relief to be able to move back to her original seat on the other side of the carriage and disappear into the pages of the latest Sophia Wainwright book. She didn't look up again until Bella and Maple called out goodbye, and she got up quickly to help Bella unload her bags in the pushchair from the train. "You're very kind." The elegant lady who'd been sitting opposite her since Salisbury nodded, as if to add emphasis to her words, and Emily felt her cheeks flush again. "Not really." She always brushed off compliments, but in this case the denial that she'd done anything special was justified. "I probably enjoyed reading the story to Maple more than she did. I used to work at a library and we hosted all sorts of community events, but the ones that involved story time were always my favourite." "You're very good at it. What made you leave?" "Redundancy?" Emily sighed. "I drifted into a job in data entry because my best friend works at the same company and she got me an interview. It pays the bills, but it's also killing my spirit, and I know I need to find something else." "You should always attempt to follow your dreams, even if it doesn't work out. That way no one can ever say you haven't tried." The old woman gave her a thoughtful look. "So, tell me, if you could do anything for a job, what would you choose?" "I'm not sure, seeing as no one is going to pay me to read all day." Emily had to suppress the urge to laugh at the thought. "I suppose I could train as a proofreader, or even an editor, but I'm not sure I'd have the skills. And looking for mistakes or things to alter would ruin the enjoyment for me." "There is another way you could get paid for reading, one I might be able to help you out with." The woman leant forward conspiratorially in her seat. "I think you'd make an excellent voice actress, reading audiobooks." This time Emily couldn't help laughing, and it was a few seconds before she was able to respond. I love that, for I can't see anyone wanting to employ me. I would, for one. The expression on the other woman's face was completely deadpan. I've recently completed a novel, and I'm not happy with any of the samples my publisher sent me of voice artists to record the audio version. None of them have the passion I heard in your voice when you were reading, or the hint of an authentic Cornish accent I can hear when we're talking now. I'd love to put you in touch with the studio my publisher works with to see what we can set up. Oh my God, really? Emily was having to hold on to the seat to stop herself from bouncing up and down with excitement as the woman nodded. Please tell me this isn't some kind of elaborate prank, because I don't think my heart can take it. No joke, I promise. Have you got a card you can give me, or your name and email address if not? My name's Emily Anderson, and I'm sure I can find something to write my email address on. I suppose I could always tear off the back cover of this book and write my details on the inside. She looked at the novel in front of her, contemplating the decision for a moment, before shaking her head and madly rooting through her handbag for something else instead. Sorry, I just can't do it, but I must have something else in here. I'm very glad to hear that you don't want to sacrifice the cover of your book, and don't worry, I can put your details straight into my phone. The other woman gave her an amused look, and Emily's face flushed red yet again, her words coming out in a rush. Sorry, you must think I'm so stupid, not thinking of that, but I'm just so excited, and I still haven't even asked your name or what kind of books you write. I'm Sophia Wainwright, and what I write is that. Sophia laid her hand on top of Emily's book, and this time there was no denying the amusement in her eyes. You're Sophia Wainwright? Emily's mouth dropped open as Sophia nodded, but she was still struggling to believe it. She'd read a lot about Sophia Wainwright, and all the photographs Emily had seen of her were shot in an artsy kind of way, with sunlight streaming through a window while Sophia scribbled words into a notebook, or an image of her walking by the sea taken from a distance. There were never any close-up portrait-style ones which would give away her age, or reveal what she looked like in enough detail to identify her clearly, which was why Emily hadn't any idea she was sitting opposite her favourite author. I am indeed, and if you need any evidence that I'm not some kind of mad crackpot, I've got the proof pages of the first book in the Goodwill Cove series right here, ready for one final read-through before I confirm that I'm happy for them to go to print. Sophia pulled the proof pages out of her handbag, and Emily caught her breath. She hadn't needed any evidence that Sophia was who she said she was, but now her next novel was right in front of her, and it was all Emily could do not to grab hold of it and start reading. I can't believe I met you in person, and I can't tell you how much your novels have helped me at difficult times in my life. Emily's addiction to Sophia's novels had begun years ago as she'd sat and read to her mother, but she didn't want to gush about how much of a fan she was, even more than she had already. She needed to at least act like she was cool enough to be able to narrate one of her novels without letting enthusiasm get the better of her. That's really lovely to hear. Thank you. Sophia touched her hand briefly. So what do you think? Would you be willing to talk to someone about being involved in recording the first book in the new series? If I could get off this train while it was still moving to get to the studio, I would. Emily still couldn't believe this was happening, and she was terrified she might wake up any minute and discover it was all a dream. It's a deal, then. As Sophia held out her hand and they shook on it, the feeling Emily had always known she would experience one day washed over her. This was it. The moment that was going to change everything and alter the entire path of her life. Chapter 2. 3 years later. There was something incredibly disconcerting about seeing a life-size cardboard cutout of yourself staring back at you. Jude had never got used to having to walk past his in the foyer of his publisher's offices, his blue eyes staring back at him and his thick brown hair looking far more carefully styled than it did these days. It was one of 5 cardboard cutouts, a rogues gallery of Foster and Friedman's best-selling authors. There was something so creepy about them, and they made Jude cringe every time. Except today, the breath caught in his throat for another reason. His cardboard cutout wasn't there. It had been replaced by one of a woman he knew wrote romantasy, whatever the hell that was, and whose debut novel had only been out for 2 months. She was standing in his spot, right next to Sophia Wainwright, whose cardboard cutout was sporting a large straw hat, obscuring most of her face, but he'd still recognize her anywhere. For the last 4 years, he and Sophia had jostled for top spot as their publisher's overall best-selling author. Now it looked suspiciously like he wasn't even in the top 5 anymore, and he was almost certain he knew why his editor had asked him to come in for a meeting. He wanted to address the downward trajectory of sales, and Jude had a horrible feeling he was about to be given some advice he didn't want to take. "Jude, great to see you." Marty Daniels had been Jude's editor for almost 8 years, and over time they'd become pretty good friends. Whatever disagreements they might have had about his books, and they sometimes did, he'd always felt they were on the same wavelength. "Good to see you too, Marty." He shook the other man's hand before taking the seat opposite him. "What have you done with my cardboard cutout?" "Ah, you noticed." Marty's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thought you always hated that thing." "I do, but I know what it means. That I'm selling less than a debut author who writes books about having sex with dragons." "That's not what romantasy is." Marty shook his head. "And you know how it goes with debuts sometimes. They can be huge, but it doesn't always guarantee ongoing success. Neither does writing 15 best-selling crime novels, apparently." Jude was well aware that he was being a bit of a dick, but he couldn't seem to help it. "You said it yourself. Your novels are still bestsellers. But I'm not going to lie. The sales are slipping, and so are the reviews." Marty clearly wasn't going to pull any punches. "And I think we need to look at the plans for the next book in the DCI McGuigan series." "What do you mean, plans for the book?" Jude was almost at the end of the 3rd book in his new series, and it had been years since he'd had to pitch a novel or even run the idea past his editor before he started. Marty trusted him to produce the goods, or at least he had done. "Do I need to speak to Adele?" Adele James was the marketing manager for Jude's books, and the 3 of them met at least once a quarter to review how things were going. But when he thought about it now, they hadn't met for almost 6 months. "I've already spoken to her." "You had a meeting without me?" Jude's scalp prickled. It had always felt as if Adele and Marty had his back and that they were a team, in it together to make his career a success. He'd been offered his first publishing deal with Foster and Friedman despite being taken on by an agent who'd turned out to be a fraud. Jude had never felt the need to get another agent as a result. It meant Marty and Adele were his entire support system, and if they were talking about him behind his back, that couldn't be good. "No, nothing like that. We were at a launch party together for one of the authors Adele looks after, and we just talked about what we thought might be going wrong." Going wrong? Jude couldn't seem to stop parroting back what Marty was saying. "Look, we're all on the same side here. We all want Jude Cavendish and the Cole McGuigan series back there in the #1 spot. But you have to acknowledge that the series is losing readers, and the reviews give a clear indication of why. They're not investing in McGuigan's story because the character arc has flatlined. Grizzled cops with a divorce behind them and whose only meaningful relationship is with alcohol are a bit of a cliché. This is your 2nd series, and I think readers expect more of DCI McGuigan than to be a replica of the lead character in your 1st series. When you wrote the 1st book in the new series, it looked like they were going to get something different, but his story has stalled. Readers need to feel invested in his life, not just the murder cases he's working on. The feeling is the stories have become what some readers are calling unrelentingly downbeat. We need something to balance all the murders out, and to achieve that, I really think McGuigan needs a personal life people care about." "Let me guess, you want him to fall in love?" "The readers do. It's what most people want in life, Jude, and they want it for the characters they're invested in too. They want to see McGuigan finding something to keep him going when everything around him has gone dark, otherwise they'll lose interest. It's just one disturbing murder after another." Marty sighed. "You're a brilliant writer, Jude. It shouldn't be too difficult for you to add that aspect in." "And what if I don't want to?" There was no what if about it. Jude definitely didn't want to do it. Then I think this will have to be the last book in the series. We could move on to something fresh instead, to see if that re-engages the readers we've lost, but... Marty didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. There were no guarantees in the world of publishing, and an author was only ever as good as their last book. Jude was signed to one of the biggest publishers in the UK, and it had been a dream come true when they'd offered him his first contract, and yet here he was, seriously considering walking away from them because he wouldn't, or couldn't, write his character a meaningful relationship. I'm already most of the way through the story. Jude crossed his arms over his chest, defensiveness creeping into his body language as well as his tone. I can look at that with you, see where we could add in this aspect of McGuigan's storyline. It doesn't all need to play out in this novel, but there needs to be enough promise of a relationship to keep the readers coming back for more. No. Look, Jude, I really think you should... He cut Marty off before he could finish. I mean, I want to do this on my own terms. If I've got to give McGuigan some kind of love interest, I at least need to feel I've done it my way. I'll go back over what I've done and see where I can weave it in. Okay, if that's the way you want to play it, but it needs to feel authentic. And you could do worse than look at the work of some of our authors whose books focus on relationships. Marty pushed his glasses up his nose, an earnest look in his eyes as he slid a book across the table towards Jude. This is Sophia Wainwright's latest. The most recent book in her Goodwill Cove series has been our #1 bestseller this year. I don't read romance. Jude couldn't stop his lip from curling slightly as he said the word, and he didn't move to pick up the book Marty had slid towards him. He only had to see the covers of those kinds of books to feel irritated. They brought back too many memories of sharing his flat and his life with a woman who claimed to believe that anyone could live happily ever after if they wanted to. The trouble was, the characters in those books were never ordinary people. They sold a dangerous fantasy that real people, living real lives, could never live up to. Jude certainly hadn't been able to, not in Mia's eyes anyway. Now, when he saw someone reading books like that on the tube, he couldn't help wondering if they really believed in all that sickly, sweet, happy ever after stuff where love conquered all. Somehow he doubted it, and he knew firsthand what a load of crap it was. Love didn't conquer all, and it was never unconditional either. There were always caveats, lots of them. Well, maybe it's time to try, Marty shrugged. Switching up the genres you read might help freshen up your writing. It can't do any harm. What's the worst that could happen? I could end up splashed across the papers for murdering my editor in cold blood. Jude raised his eyebrows, and for the first time Marty's smile reached his eyes. Oh, what would your choice of weapon be? We must have seen nearly all of them across your books. I don't think I've ever had a murder where the victim was beaten to death with a romance novel. Jude's tone was deadpan, and he tried not to question what it was about him that made the idea of that storyline so much more appealing than giving his lead character a successful relationship. I don't think we have seen that yet. Marty was still smiling, but then he fixed Jude with another of his "this is no joke" looks. Are you confident you can still deliver the first draft by January? Once I've read this, it should be a piece of cake. Jude picked up the Sophia Wainwright novel gingerly, as if it might suddenly grow teeth and bite him. After all, how hard can romance writing be? The plot's the same in every single one of these things. Lots of people seem to think writing romance is easy, but you don't see any of them on the bestseller lists with Sophia, do you? Marty gave him a wry smile. But you're a talented author, Jude, and I really hope you're right about how easy this is going to be. Either way, I'm sure you can pull it off and get your cardboard cutout back on display where it belongs. What better motivation could I ask for than that? Jude shook his head, not willing to acknowledge the tiny part of him that wanted to see his cardboard cutout the next time he walked into the offices. He might hate the sight of it, but it signalled success. And when success was all you had, the thought of losing it was terrifying. If Jude's life had been a Hollywood movie, he'd have been surrounded by lots of balls of screwed-up paper, abandoned attempts to revise the story, discarded in a fit of rage each time he realized just how terrible they were. Highlighting and deleting great swathes of text on his laptop wasn't nearly so poetic. But that was what he seemed to have spent most of his time doing lately, and DCI McGuigan wasn't the only one taking comfort in the arms of an old friend called alcohol. The conversation with Marty hadn't been a complete surprise. His editor had mentioned before the start of the new series that readers would need to be invested in DCI McGuigan's personal life for it to have longevity and to feel different to his first series. He tried to provide that in his lead character's flirtation with Dr. Imogen Matthews, the icily cool pathologist who Cole was thrown into close contact with. But even he could see how wooden their interaction was. He'd spent the best part of the last 24 hours trying to escalate the romance, if you could call it that, and it was a disaster. Jude could describe the grisliest of murders without missing a beat. The arterial spurt, the puddle of scarlet blood pooling around the victim's body, even the unmistakable stench of death. But when it came to trying to describe a kiss, he was floundering. Reading back what he'd written, attempt number 27 no less, it all sounded so clinical, more like two robots exchanging data than two people taking their relationship to the next level. Jesus Christ! Jude highlighted the last 2 paragraphs he'd typed and hit the delete button so hard that his laptop jumped on his desk. He took off the dark-rimmed glasses he was wearing for a moment and rubbed the right-hand side of his temple. This was proving even more of a headache than he'd imagined. Maybe I could just get him a dog, he said the words out loud, despite the fact he was the only person in the room. Getting a dog was something that might humanize Cole McGuigan for readers, and it was something Jude could get on board with too, because his fox red Labrador, Rufus, was undeniably the most important thing in his life. Part of the reason he was finding the whole romance thing impossible to write was because he didn't believe in the forever kind of love that those stories perpetuated. It was a fantasy, a chemical reaction that people tried to build into a lifelong commitment, which more often than not failed. If someone had asked Jude to explain what he thought about the concept of love, they'd probably assume he was cynical because of what had happened with Mia. But there was more to it than that. He'd been incredibly skeptical long before he met her. He should have listened to his head back then, instead of allowing a chemical reaction to make him forget everything he knew to be true. They'd met as interns, both of them fresh out of university and trying to take their first steps in a journalism career. Mia had ambitions of working for Vogue, and Jude just wanted to write as a way of making sense of the world. They'd moved into a tiny studio flat together, taking on bar work at night to make ends meet and still barely having enough money for food. At first, their situation could have come straight out of one of the rom-coms Mia loved so much, and they hadn't needed anything apart from each other. Sundays, when neither of them worked, had been the highlight of the week. They'd wake up and make love, before going out for a walk and grabbing lunch together. Fancy restaurants were way out of their league, but sharing a portion of chips down by the river had seemed about as good as life got. Afterwards, they'd go home again, curl up in front of a movie and just enjoy being together. Mia had been the one to start talking as if their relationship might be forever, and she'd also been the first one to say she loved him. Jude had surprised himself when he told her that he loved her too, and had realized he meant it. There'd even been a moment when he thought that maybe he'd been wrong all these years, and that those kind of feelings really could last forever. But then Mia had met Baxter. Baxter was an internationally renowned fashion photographer, 20 years her senior, who went by his surname, because his first name was the far more mundane-sounding Colin. The first day they met, he invited Mia out to lunch, in Manhattan. She'd laughed when she told Jude about it, at just how ridiculous the idea was, and how she'd never have said yes in a million years. Pretty soon, Baxter's name began creeping into the conversation more and more, and that million years Mia had promised became a little over a fortnight. That was when she'd agreed to have dinner, and a whole lot more, with a brand new love of her life. Mia had tried to spin it with those exact words when she told Jude she was leaving. "I didn't mean to fall in love with Baxter, but it was something neither of us could control. Almost as soon as I met him, I knew I'd found the love of my life." She'd sat doe-eyed and tearful on the edge of the bed she'd shared with Jude for over a year, and he'd wanted to laugh. What she'd said had been such a cliché, and he'd thought of asking exactly what it was about Baxter that she'd fallen in love with so incredibly quickly. But he already knew. Mia's new love could help make all her career ambitions a reality. He could take her to any restaurant, anywhere in the world, and give her the kind of lifestyle most people didn't even dream of. How could Jude possibly have expected her to say no to that? Only a fool would have turned down that chance, unless it had been for love. Except Mia hadn't really loved Jude, at least nowhere near enough. She'd spelled that out to him, in the midst of what had seemed like a very well-rehearsed goodbye speech. "I'm so sorry, Jude, but a part of me will always love you." He hadn't been able to stop himself from laughing at that bit, and a few minutes later, Mia had walked out of the door to start a new life with Baxter. Jude had almost wanted to be heartbroken. If he'd been heartbroken, it would have meant he'd loved Mia enough for forever to have been a possibility. But he hadn't. He was hurt, but not heartbroken, not even close. All it had done was reinforce his belief that no one had ever truly loved him, not from the moment he was born. That was the part of his story that could really have broken his heart if he thought about it for too long. But he didn't allow himself that kind of indulgence. Instead, he buried himself in writing his first book, and by the time it was finished, Baxter had moved on to someone even younger than Mia. She'd got in contact, telling Jude it had all been a big mistake, and she wished they could go back to when it had been just the two of them in their cramped little studio flat. In some ways, Jude had felt sorry for Mia, but he couldn't even pretend that was what he wanted. Not with her, and not with anyone, because love, such as it was, only ever lasted until something better came along, and he didn't want his life like that. It wasn't just the romantic kind of love that Jude had serious doubts about. He wasn't sure that anyone could really love another person unconditionally. There was always some kind of transaction involved. He'd learned that lesson as a child.